From ABC News headquarters, this is World News with Charles Gibson.
Good evening. A luxury on the last night of this broadcast. 3 stories that could lead the program. In Copenhagen, President Obama intervened to get a last-minute agreement on global warming. There is a massive winter storm coming to the eastern U.S. But we begin with a U.S. missile strike ordered by the president, which killed dozens of al-Qaeda militants, an action which officials say was necessary to protect American interests. So our chief investigative correspondent, Brian Ross, joins us now. Brian?
Charlie, White House officials tell ABC News the orders for U.S. military warplanes to attack suspected al-Qaeda sites in Yemen yesterday came directly from the Oval Office. The action represents a major escalation by President Obama in his efforts to go after the terror group in yet another country. The U.S. military used air-launched cruise missiles in the attacks on 2 separate locations in Yemen. Pictures broadcast tonight on Al Jazeera showed dozens of bodies covered by sheets. Officials said some 35 suspected al-Qaeda figures had been killed. Opposition groups said dozens of civilians were also killed. A second attack targeted a site where U.S. officials say an imminent attack against a U.S. asset was being planned. In his speech about a troop surge in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago, President Obama hinted that action against Yemen could come.
Where al-Qaeda and its allies attempt to establish a foothold, whether in Somalia or Yemen or elsewhere, they must be confronted by growing pressure and strong partnerships.
The al-Qaeda presence in Yemen has been steadily growing in the last 2 years. The U.S. Embassy was attacked by suspected al-Qaeda gunmen just last year. And the presumed military commander of al-Qaeda in Yemen, Qaim al-Raymi, has frequently appeared on internet videos, offering an alternative to the training camps in Pakistan and Afghanistan for new recruits.
Now, if they can go to Yemen just as easily or easier and get training there and then come out again, well, all your efforts in Waziristan are a bit of a waste of time.
Al-Raymi was considered a prime target of the attack Thursday, but officials say he apparently escaped alive. Yemen has publicly claimed the U.S. played no role in the attacks yesterday, but they were orchestrated directly from the White House, which now appears very much hands-on in the efforts to decimate al-Qaeda wherever it is found, Charlie.
All right, Brian Ross, our chief investigative correspondent. Thanks. Next, we're going to turn to the weather. Winter isn't waiting till Monday. What is being called the storm of the decade promises to disrupt holiday travel, holiday shopping, and holiday shipping, since millions of packages need to reach their destinations before Christmas. Some flights tomorrow have already been canceled. So ABC's news weather editor, Sam Champion, is joining us now. Sam?
Hey, Charlie, how are you? We've got a big storm in the making right now. Let me show you where it is. It's this area of low pressure that's down in the Gulf, and it really is making a big rain for Florida all the way through Georgia and the Carolinas. But it's when this storm system gets its act together and goes to the eastern seaboard for Saturday and Sunday that it becomes a real snow producer. This is all going to be all snow because the temperatures from Virginia all the way into northern New England are 10 to 15 degrees below normal. I'll show you how it started in Lynchburg, areas like Lynchburg, Virginia, the Appalachians, Asheville, North Carolina earlier today with what was a light snow, though Asheville came in with 7 inches, which is their record for the day. But remember, this storm is still off in the Gulf of Mexico, so we think it's going to get much, much worse. Campbell County, Tennessee tonight will show you idea of what we're looking at, a very heavy snow. This is going to have a big snow ratio of either 12 to 1 or 15 to 1, and let me tell you what we mean by that. A 15 to 1 snow ratio means that 1 inch of rain can deliver 15 inches of snow because this air is so cold and so dry that we think that's what's going to happen out of this. So here's who gets snow out of this storm if it verifies, and we think it will. From Asheville to Roanoke to Washington, D.C. to Philadelphia to New York to Boston, all snow. Now, D.C. is just a few hours from now it starts, and a possibility of 10 to 15 inches of snow there. Philadelphia probably starts around midnight, 9 to 12 inches of snow there. New York City around 10 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow morning around 6 to 10 inches of snow there. And there are blizzard warnings for Long Island, blizzard watches for the Cape. Charlie?
All right, thanks very much, Sam Champion. A very unusual, heavy snowstorm coming before winter even begins. There was high drama in Copenhagen today where at the 11th hour, an agreement on global warming was hammered out by President Obama and other world leaders. It calls for a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by all nations. Calls for a reduction, but doesn't require a reduction. Jim Sciutto joins us from Copenhagen.
Charlie, White House officials say that the key moment came when President Obama burst into a meeting of Chinese, Indian, and Brazilian leaders uninvited. He said he didn't want them negotiating in secret. Once inside, they say, through the sheer force of will, they were able to seal the deal. After a day of frantic shuttle diplomacy, President Obama announced an agreement he called historic.
Today we've made a meaningful and unprecedented breakthrough here in Copenhagen. For the first time in history, all major economies have come together to accept their responsibility to take action to confront the threat of climate change.
Under the deal, all countries will submit written targets for reducing their greenhouse emissions by early next year. Nations will then submit to international analysis to verify whether they meet those targets. Overall, they're agreeing to keep the temperature rise worldwide to no more than 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, which will mean some countries would have to cut emissions by as much as 50%. However, as President Obama emphasized, the agreement is not legally binding for the U.S. or any other nation.
We tried to be modest in what we thought we could accomplish. Whatever it is that we promise, we can actually deliver on.
The final agreement falls far below expectations of a wide-ranging deal with enforceable targets. In the end, countries will decide both how much they reduce emissions and how to reduce them. President Obama said he still hopes the agreement can be made legally binding, though he admitted it will be very hard. He said he preferred to take one step forward with an imperfect agreement, Charlie, than 2 steps back with no agreement at all.
But, Jim, when you use phrases like not legally binding and no enforceable targets, you wonder if this really is worth the paper it's printed on.
Well, leaders here believe it is at least worth something. There are public commitments that can be verified. I think that it's best described as relief here. There were many moments today, Charlie, when many leaders felt there would be no agreement at all. So I think they're just happy to have at least some progress.
All right, Jim Sciutto in Copenhagen at the climate conference. Thanks to you. The Senate, meanwhile, has gone into overdrive in its effort to pass a health care reform bill by Christmas. Even though the details of the latest version of the bill haven't been made public, the schedule is calling for nonstop debate and votes around the clock throughout the weekend. Our chief medical editor, Dr. Tim Johnson, is joining us. And Tim, where this stands now, the question that I hear most often is this bill, without a public option, without an expansion of Medicare, is it better than nothing?
I would say absolutely, Charlie. We have to remember that doing nothing leaves us with the status quo, a non-system that is headed for financial and healthcare disaster. The bill addresses 2 important areas. One, insurance reforms. I'm told there are 400 pages in the bill that address insurance reforms, such as getting rid of pre-existing conditions, expanding to 30 million who are now not insured. It also addresses pilot projects for financial reform, such as how to shift from a fee-for-service system, which explodes costs, to an outcomes payment system. I would personally prefer to have public option and or Medicare expansion directly challenging private insurance. But what's left is not insignificant.
But you have said to me a number of times, even if this bill passes and people think the sort of healthcare world has changed elementally, that people actually won't notice much difference.
They won't notice much difference the next day. The major reforms are not scheduled, some of them, until 2013 or 2014. I think there's going to be some backlash on that, but I also predict that there will be constant tinkering with whatever gets passed by every Congress coming up in the next few years.
And that's if, and it is still a big if.
It is an if.
A bill gets passed. All right, Dr. Tim Johnson, thanks very much. And still ahead on World News, new evidence that the number of children with autism is soaring as more places help them feel at home. The father fighting to get his son out of Brazil tells our reporter the situation is beyond cruel. And at the end of the broadcast, hitting the road.